friends, welcome back to the next session on operations planning, scheduling and control. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be understanding and dealing with the concept of capability-based flow control. The learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by capability-based flow control, what are the various roles of operations planning in capability-based flow control, and list down the various activities undertaken in the capability-based flow control. Now let's begin with our learning. So first, let's understand what do we mean by capability-based flow control. The capability-based flow control is a set of or a certain series of activities that has been undertaken in order to identify how do we conduct the activity in a better, well-coordinated way, and how do we identify the capability of a machine or of a particular commodity. This may be accomplished by establishing a capability, and the concept of capability security regulates access to a stored object as it has been previously stated. So the users in a particular organization are frequently granted a certain access to a certain fields and features of a stored object to specified other users or perhaps anybody else. And this implies that it is an account wishes to account the stored object of the another account, then it must have a wide capability, valid capability for that particular item. So capability-based flow control focuses on a certain activity about whether we are capable to conduct a certain activity or whether we are not capable to conduct a certain activity. This particular capability may be related to a certain machine, to a particular technology, to a particular skill sets, to a particular human beings or a human resource which are available, and so on. So the security or the measures that we need to undertake to regulate a certain activity, whether it is related to a certain object or whether it is not related to a certain object, is the consideration of identifying the capability-based flow control. Now let's understand what the capability-based flow control with respect to a certain example. So, wherein case we have a certain example wherein a Bob Smith, who is a car owner, and he wants to conduct certain activities. So what does he do? He raises a certain request, that is a Bob's car engine data, and accordingly, the access capability, that is beta 1, shows certain information. The resource ID for this particular consideration is the engine status. The assigner ID is the car owner, that is the Bob Smith, and the assignee ID, that the person who will contain the various activity, is the maintenance service manager. So accordingly, we have a maintenance service manager who will look after those particular activities. And accordingly, what are the rights that have been given is query, which is always delegable, the change that is always delegable, and what time duration that has been provided. So date, that is dt, YY. So the period, that is when does the period starts and when does the period end. Since and until is the consideration of when the period is starting and when the period is ending. So that's the capability card, which shows a certain detailed information about the access capability, that is about how a capability can be undertaken for a certain product and in what way those capabilities can be undertaken in a business organization. The authorized capability, that is root capability, and the assigner signature can be placed at this particular location. The next perspective we have when a particular service request is being raised, then on those particular service requests, the Dave Jones, that is the car operator or the service manager, the car's manufacturing maintenance service manager, it is delivered to him, and accordingly, he needs to access the capability card, and accordingly, he needs to undertake the various capability factors, and accordingly, the service request needs to be undertaken. The Bob's car engine data, the access capability, that is beta 2. The details that have been provided in this particular concern is, that is the resource ID is same, that is engine status. The assigner ID, now it changed. So earlier the assigner ID was Bob Smith. Now the assigner ID becomes Dave Jones, who is a maintenance service manager. This assigner ID, that is earlier it was the maintenance service manager. Now the assigner ID changes to the maintenance service at carman.com. So a particular vendor or the service provider at which the service is being undertaken. And lastly, the rights that have been provided, that is the query that has been raised. So accordingly, whatever query that has been raised, a description needs to be provided about that particular query, and the duration. So since and until is a particular duration, that is for which period the duration or service activity needs to be undertaken, and what is the period of that particular service. The authorized capability as to the root capability and the capability, that is beta 1. So from where the authority is been moving. So it has been moving, earlier it was been moving from Bob to Dave Jones, and accordingly, it was having a root capability, that is the real owner, that is the car's owner. But now in this case, the authorized capability has been moving from Bob Smith to Dave Jones, and hence when it has been moving from Dave Jones to maintenance service manager, it is the capability of beta 1. So the card that has been prepared, that is beta 1 card. And we assign a signature. So they assign that particular task, they assign a signature. That is Dave Jones' signature is to be fixed at this location. Then we have the concept of maintenance service, that is a car manufacturer, and accordingly, the service request or the query is being raised at this particular level. So when the particular service request query is being raised, the third activity that is being undertaken is the operation request. So on the basis of operation request, again, now the resource ID remains the same. That is the engine status. We need to test, we need to identify. The requester ID, that is maintenance service at carman.com. Again, it gets changed. Earlier it was Bob Smith, then it becomes assigner ID is Dave Jones, and now the requester ID is the maintenance service car@man.com. The operational activity, it has been always moving from one person to another person, and hence the operation, that is actual service operation that we need to take, is query the engine RPM, rates per minute or rounds per minute. So for those consideration, we need to identify what is the engine RPM. The requester ID, that is capability of beta 2. Earlier it was root capability, that is car owner. Then it has moved to service maintenance manager, that is beta 1, that is capability of beta 1. Now it has been moved to capability of beta 2, that is it has been moving from Bob's car engine data to from Dave Jones to the another service operations request manager, that is the maintenance service. And lastly, it have a certain description of this particular product and the requester's signature. So from whom the request has been passed from one level to another level. And lastly, here you can see in the last consideration, at the Bob's car, the car control unit has been affixed, and accordingly the car is ready for its delivery and its continuous operations. So these are the various procedure activities that have been performed in case of an capability-based process control. Now let's understand the next step as to what are the various good practices that have been undertaken in terms of the capability-based control. So instead of linking directly to an object, the capabilities are identified by a certain path and the linked to a target path. So accordingly, it is a well-coordinated series of activities wherein the product or activity moves from one level to another level, one activity to another activity, and it is not linked directly to an object. So instead of linking directly to an object, we identify what capabilities or what steps that needs to be undertaken. And on those particular steps, the path and link to a target path is provided, and the product keeps on moving from one product category to another product category. Capability seems to be either public, so any user may access them, or it may be a private constitution wherein it can have unrestricted users or it may have a public users also. So certain authorized users can access that particular data, or other users can also access that particular data. So depending on what is the applicability of that particular data, depending on what is the privacy or secrecy or urgency and importance of that particular data, we can have a certain identification of capability as to whether it can be a public usage or it can be a private usage consideration. The public capabilities are built using a strong public pathways, which means that they have a public domain. So when we have a certain consideration of the public domain, we need to identify whether it is a public capability and how public pathways can be created. So for a public pathway, it can move in a very frequent direction, and from those frequent directions, the activities can be conducted as and when it has been required, and how the product, commodity, goods and services move from one location to another location in a public scenario or a public environment. And hence, the public domain plays an important role in this case. They may be acquired from both authorized accounts, that is auth account and a public accounts, and after that they have been created. So it can be accessed from both the ends, that is either it has been created from the public pathways or the public domain, or if it has been moved towards a private domain, then accordingly the authorized users can access that particular item, and the various good capability features can be implemented in those considerations of the organization. Hence, those activities can be taken as and when the need arises or the activity needs to be completed and it needs to be fulfilled. Now let's understand the concept of planning and organizing a capability. That is, how do we plan and how do we organize a certain capability? So for designing or planning, organizing a certain capability, or certain steps of planning have been required. So what are those steps? The first step is private capabilities are built in with private pathways, which means they have a private domain. So as we have seen in a public capability, they are built with the public pathways. In the same fashion, private capabilities are built with the private pathways, and they are also having a private domain, which is accessible or permissible to only authorized or restricted users. Here in this case, they may have thorough authorized accounts, that is an authorized account for the specific users of a certain individuals or a certain peoples, and it can move from only one individual to another individual only when the authorized access has been given. And if the authorized access is not given, then such activity or assignment of those activities cannot be undertaken, and hence authorized activity or authorized access is essentially required. A capability can be borrowed to gain a reference to a stored object once it has been created or it has been obtained. So if you want to gain a certain authorized access to a certain account or to a certain creation, then accordingly we can borrow a certain commodity, certain stored object, and from those creations, the private property or the public property documents can be accessed and the capability can be identified from those considerations. When a capability is being created, if it is given a type that defines what type it is being borrowed as, and this enables a stored object functionality to be exposed and hidden. So what is the exposure that has been provided, how the capability is being created, whether it gives a definition as to the borrowing status, and whether the object's functionality can be exposed or it can be hidden. All those factors can be considered and can be seen, and on those perspectives, the organization of capability can be identified in a very better and effective way. So from those particular considerations, we need to organize a perfect capability, and from those considerations, we need to see whether it is an exposed or whether it is an hidden perspectives. Now let's understand the various considerations as to the application of a capability plan. So the applications of capability plan can be applicable either to the marketing department, the finance department, the operations department, the materials department, the engineering department, and the human resource department. So all type of departments or the sectors or the venues which are available, the capability can be applied. For a marketing department, for conduction of various marketing or operational activities, this capability can be implemented. For a finance department, for the finance or conduction availability of funds, finances, and so on, the finance department can implement such type of activities. For an operations department, when they need to implement a certain activity, those activities can be conducted in better consideration, and operational activities can also be conducted in a better way in case of capability plan, wherein they need to see that how those operational activities can be moved from one person to another person, one machine to another machine, one operational activity to other operations activity. The next consideration is in terms of materials and engineering department. That is, what is the amount of materials, what is the amount of storage, what is the amount of warehouse or the material that is required, and how the engineering activities needs to be undertaken. In case of an human resource department, that is, what are the various involvement of people, what are the involvement of various people who are there, the various resources, the various managers, the various employees, the shop floor people, the top level management, the middle level management, and so on. So from those considerations, we can understand that the target route does not have a lead to a legitimate object, but it might be an empty. So it could lead to an object that does not satisfy the required type interface. So accordingly, there should be a proper link and a proper sequence of activities which is conducted, which always leads to you for a process capability control flowchart. So capability-based control flowchart leads to a certain identification about how we conduct a certain activity in a sequential way, and they have been completed as and when it has been required. The link function does not verify that the target path has been valid or exists at the time and the capability is established, nor does it verify that the target value is of a specified type. So it should be very clarified as to what is the target path that has been provided and how those activities are being conducted in very well coordinated way. So for those consideration, organization should be very functional. It should be very effective to understand and to identify about how all those activities can be completed in a better way and in a well coordinated way or a series of activities, how the process capability based control activities can be completed. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood what do we mean by the capability based flow control, which planning is been required and which has been used in the capability based flow control, and how to implement the operational flow and connect with the capability based flow control. I hope you must have enjoyed the learning in this particular session. We'll stay connected and we'll continue with our learning. Thank you for your patience listening. Thank you.